Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Life of an NQT and another Wednesday night webinar. I'm just going to move my microphone, which I completely forgot to do beforehand. Bear with me. Always important to get that bit done. Thanks for coming back for another Wednesday night webinar. This week we are talking all about behaviour. So fingers crossed you are ready for that one. I'm going to start off just by saying, before we get going tonight, that if you do want to get involved and interactive, this is the time to do so. So if you want to get involved on Twitter, you can. It's at Life of an NQT. And the hashtag is Wednesday Night Webinar, which I'm tracking on the screen here. But also, as always, if you are a YouTube user and you've got an account, then you can get involved on the live chat tonight too. So make sure you get involved however you can. This is Life of an NQT. If you are new to the team, to the family, to the party, welcome. Hi, I'm James. I am a primary school teacher, have been for 7 years now, a trainee teacher mentor, work with NQTs. I'm a member of our school leadership team, senior leadership team, been ahead of year for 4 years. And as you can imagine, things very, very busy at the moment with everything that's going on, which I'll talk about in just a second. I'm a staff governor, I'm a subject leader, and I've done some lectures for Kingston University as well, which is where the whole idea of Life of an NQT came about. Because, as I say, every week, it was 7 years ago that I was asked to go and stand in front of 100 soon-to-be NQTs and talk to them about what the real experience is, life and teaching on the front line. And that's what I'm doing with this first series of Wednesday night webinars that we are on now. It's episode 4 already, which is quite crazy. But this is all about those big subjects in schools and education that we can prepare NQTs, current NQTs, NQTs to be, trainee teachers, whoever, to be ready for and to give them some insight into what is to come. So the format of this evening, as I've said, it's all about teaching. I know from myself, from when I was an NQT back in 2013, that teaching is one of those biggest fears for trainee teachers and for new teachers. And so I thought this was a good time to discuss everything that we can do about behaviour, or the strategies that we can use about behaviour, and a little bit of the thinking behind it as well. It does tie into what we've done over the last couple of weeks as well. So if you missed last week's webinar, which is up on YouTube, it was all about finding your own identity as a teacher. That is a good opportunity, if you haven't seen that one, to go back and to think what it is that you want to get out of teaching and what you want to pass on to your class, because that actually might have a bearing on what it is that you will get out of this evening's lecture as well. So remember, they are all on YouTube. If you haven't seen any of the past ones, please do go and catch up and get in contact as you wish. I will say as well that we are going to aim for a slightly shorter webinar this evening, as I'm sure many of you will understand in the different experiences that you have in education. This week has been quite mad after the evening's announcement about the return to schools with all things coronavirus and COVID-19. So it has been a very, very busy week for me in terms of school, and therefore tonight's webinar is, well, I say it's going to be a little bit shorter. I know what I'm like, but please do not be too thrown off if it's a little bit shorter, because obviously it's been a lot of work in other areas of the teaching career, and that'll probably be the case for the next the final two webinars in this series of the Wednesday night webinars. So let's talk about behaviour. The first part of tonight's webinar is about behaviour and the fear around it, because it is a big concern. And I know this to be true. For many new and training teachers, the big question is, will you be able to control your class? And it's funny, because now that I've stepped away from being the NQT and the trainee teacher, I realise that that actually isn't the biggest concern. It really isn't. And I remember so vividly going in when I first started training as a BA student in 2010, and going into the classroom for the first time, October 2010, and seeing this group of 30 children. I thought, well, this is going to be easy, because, you know, they're kids and I'm an adult and they'll listen to me. And all of a sudden, after your first day, just watching other teachers, you think, wow, actually, this is not easy. And behaviour is a big, big concern for so many new teachers, because they just don't know how they're going to do it. And it's one of those strange things, because if I can give one piece of advice from the off, it's that behaviour management actually does come naturally to many teachers. It might take a couple of months to get used to it. And of course, if you are a parent yourself, or if you've worked with children before, you naturally have that ability to deal with children's behaviour. It does come naturally. But when you see it as a trainee teacher or as an NQT, all of a sudden we start overthinking it. I think that comes down to the fact of how we're trained. You know, we think about educational theory, and we think about behaviourism and all of these different elements. And we realise that it's a very important part of our role as a teacher. but we overthink it almost, and we think about what we're going to do. We think about those strategies, but a lot of behaviour management comes naturally. So if you are somebody who is a trainee teacher worried about that for September or whenever schools return fully, just be aware of that, and just remember that in the back of your mind, that actually we all know how to deal with behaviour naturally. It's just how we do so, I suppose, in terms of what we say and what we do, that we need to think about a little bit better. There's lots of advice out there around behaviourism as well, and many different cliches. I love talking about the fact that it's no smiles till Christmas. I genuinely was told that back when I became an NQT. Don't smile before Christmas. And it was said in a funny, jokey way by some, but others I know for a fact it wasn't. They really did believe that you shouldn't be smiling before Christmas, which is crazy. And anybody who has worked with children knows that actually you need to be warm and you need to model that good behaviour back to them. So there are lots of cliches around there, some very almost old folk tales when it comes to behaviour management. My suggestion, don't listen to a lot of them, but to really think about what it is that you've been trained to do and what your colleagues do within the school. For me, and this is in my opinion, the key to good behaviour comes down to 3 C's. It's consistency, it's confidence, and clarity. So during the webinar tonight, I will talk to you a little bit more about those. And as we come to situations and scenarios, I might refer to those words quite a bit. One thing I will say now, actually, what I remember is that if you do have scenarios today and you've got any situations in which you have struggled in terms of behaviour management, or you've been proud of your behaviour management and you'd like something positive or constructive, again, put it in the normal ways. Tweet it to me at Life of an NQT. Please use the hashtag Wednesday Night Webinar because it pops up on my screen then. Or of course you can use the live chat here on YouTube as well. I'm pointing to my screen like you can see what I can see. Very different. But yeah, so the 3 C's I think for behaviour management are consistency, confidence, and clarity. Your consistency is all about your approach to behaviour management. You need to be consistent. You need to be fair with the children. You need to make sure that although we do adapt our behaviour management for certain children so that the expectations are slightly different, that your approach is consistent. If you are going to give a warning for something, and you say to all of your children you're going to give a warning and then there is going to be a consequence or a sanction, you need to be consistent with that. Okay, you need to stick to your guns. You need to have confidence. Children can sense fear. It's a bit like animals. Children can sense fear and unease. Okay, you need to be confident with them and know that you're in the right. I think a lot of that, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, is knowing your behaviour policy. It's knowing what you are going to do, and it is being consistent. If you are wavering with your behaviour management strategies, the children will use that to their advantage. It's a sad but true fact. Many of them will use that to their advantage. So be confident with it and present it in the best way. And the other thing is clarity, letting the children know where they stand. This is a bit of a funny one because, of course, they're not adults, and I think it is easier to communicate with adults where they stand. But they are children. Doesn't mean they're stupid, okay? They are young adults, they are young people, they're people that we are developing to be brilliant people. We're thinking about their values, their knowledge, their social skills. So actually to know children where they stand and what your expectations are is really clear, okay? Tell them what you want in the classroom. Tell them what you expect for learning behaviour. You know, make it really clear that you want silence. Make it really clear that you want quiet talking. Make it clear that you expect the children to be kind, understanding, forgiving, resilient, all of those values that you want, but be clear with it. Make them know what their expectations are. And the really key thing with that one is that if you are clear and you let the children know where they stand and what your expectations are, that allows them then to take ownership in their behaviour. And that is almost, if you think Bloom's taxonomy and higher order skills, for me, a higher order children will help the children to show them where they stand and what your expectations are. Then that is when they can take ownership of their behaviour. I've just had a message come up on screen to say apparently there might be some issues with the connection, so fingers crossed you can also hear me and see me. I know that quality has been a little bit rubbish the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, that is to do with internet providers in the lockdown, but let me just make sure I'm turning off everything Wi-Fi in front of me so that we do not have an issue, hopefully, with that again. Yeah, so letting the children know where you stand. It's the consistency, it's the confidence, and it's the clarity. Those are the big 3 things for me. And of course, there's a lot of research and books around behaviour. You've got Bill Rogers, who is a god of behaviour. You've got Sue Cowley, you've got Paul Dix. All of them I have either been involved with training with them, or I read their books. Or with Bill Rogers, was worshipped at the university that I went to. I haven't quoted anyone tonight, which is a bit unusual for me. Usually I've consulted the books and the textbooks and the educational research. I did tweet Sue Cowley the other day, but I haven't quoted anything tonight within the webinar. So if there is anything that mirrors what I said, then it's purely because it's stuck with me through my training and my reading. I'm not quoting them, but if it's there, then it's because, as all of us as practitioners, we pick up ideas, we magpie them, and it influences the way in which we conduct ourselves. So yeah, credit to those three and to many others with behaviour, but if I do quote them, it's not done directly, but it's obviously sunk in at some point. So we're talking about behaviour this evening, and we are talking about the teaching standard against the reality. And that's what I titled this week's webinar, because they are two very different things. And again, when I started as a BA student, I encountered behaviour and the thought of behaviour management as part of my teaching standards. It was the old Q standards back then. There were 33 of them. It's TS7 now. But actually, the two of them are very different. Behaviour management in a lecture hall, when you're reading in a textbook, or you're watching a video from Teachers TV, as it was back then, or behaviour management in a theory lesson, a pedagogy lesson, or an assignment, a learning journey, all of those things, very, very different to what you're actually going to experience on the front line. And I love talking about the front line for behaviour, because it is really like that. It's a very topical word at the moment, but you do see a whole different side when you are on the front line of behaviour. And depending on your role in schools, you'll see different elements of it. So I wanted to start tonight by talking about the teaching standard. And again, this links to what I did a couple of weeks ago with a webinar referencing those teacher standards and how you would evidence them. But TS7, which is the teaching standard, says that all teachers, if it's a trainee teacher, NQT, experienced teacher, whatever, needs to be able to manage behaviour effectively to ensure a good and safe learning environment. Now, even from that standard, there is something there that many of us as newer teachers miss, because we worry about the behaviour, and we worry about observations where maybe children are talking or they're not quite focusing on their work, and there's a behaviour element to that. But that's not the whole reason why behaviour is important to our job. Yes, it makes us look good if we can get the children to behave, and yes, it looks good if we can model those good values. But it's all about making a good and safe learning environment. It is about the learning, and it's got to come back to that at the same time. So when we are thinking about behaviour management and the strategies that you want to develop, again, it's a good idea to get into your mind how that links to what you want to do as a teacher. So if you want to be a teacher who delivers great lessons and imparts that knowledge onto your children, then for you, the reason to effectively manage behaviour is that it is going to help them. That behaviour for learning is going to be strong. Again, part of the teaching standard talks about clear rules and routines for behaviour in classroom, to take responsibility, a big word again, ownership, for promoting good and courteous behaviour both in school, both in classrooms and around the school, in accordance with the school's behaviour policy. And again, in a moment, I'm going to talk to you about how you might get ready to develop your behaviour management as a new teacher, or how you can continue to develop it as an NQT, or NQT +1, as many of you are coming up to now if you are new to the profession. But yeah, school behaviour policy is a great place to start, but it is thinking about those rules and routines as well. Think about what you can do within your classroom to get the children motivated and engaged in behaving in the right manner. To have high expectations of behaviour and to establish a framework for discipline within a range of strategies using praise, sanctions, rewards consistently and fairly. And again, one of the three C's that I said about consistently is in that one. It is about having high expectations, and I think that is so important. I've seen it before with teachers who don't have the right expectation on behaviour. And one of the unpickings of their behaviour management strategies in class is because they don't have that expectation, they don't share it with their children, and they don't really have the right motive with it. Okay, again, if you were watching last week's webinar, we were talking about teachers and the different identities we had, and we were saying how some teachers end up wanting to befriend the children more than to become that teacher. You do need to have that authoritarian role, and by having the high expectations and sharing with the children, that's where you're going to have success in good behaviour management. To establish that framework as well, using the strategies, praise, the most important tool in the toolbox when it comes to positive and good, strong behaviour management, but also sanctions. And you don't need to be scared of that. And I think that, again, is one of the things that new teachers are scared of doing, particularly if you're worried about the repercussions of getting it wrong. Okay, worrying about what a senior leadership member or head teacher or a parent might say if a child does receive a sanction. Again, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But don't worry about using them. The two have to be used together to be effective, okay, and to be useful. But also your reward systems too, and we love that. You know, I will say this a million times over. In the 7 years I've been teaching, rewarding children is just lovely, isn't it? You get those moments where a child does a brilliant piece of work and you give them a reward, however small, and it just means the world to them. And those moments are so powerful, not just to encourage the children to keep learning, but also for their behaviour as well. So it's a key thing to use within that teaching standard. To manage classes effectively and to use approaches which are appropriate to pupils' needs in order to involve and motivate them. Children that are well behaved, quite simply, are motivated and want to get involved in what they're doing in the classroom. If you can involve children who aren't as well behaved, that's going to draw them in and gives them the opportunity to make the right decisions. And one of the big things, again, that I was taught about behaviour in the past is about the fact that you do need to give children decisions. It's a good opportunity to allow them to take their ownership, as I've said, on their behaviour, and for them to do it for the right reasons, not just do it because they're told to. But also that will then sort of get their buy-in a little bit more. So involving pupils and motivating them is really, really key for a good, strong behaviour management strategy. And also to maintain good relationships with pupils. But alongside that, and again, the teaching standard says this, is to exercise appropriate authority. Now, many people would read that, I imagine, as being too authoritarian and not sort of bringing it down enough. But I would also argue that it's the other way, and not being authoritarian enough, and acting decisively when necessary. There are times when we have to use our behaviour management strategies for health and safety reasons. And one of the stories I wanted to share with you today, which was probably my first one about within my first year placement, when I was at my first year placement school. And the first time where I really had to think about my behaviour management, and I came away and I reflected from that one, was when I was teaching a year 3 class and we were outside on the playground playing hockey. Now, before this point, I'd literally been in school for about 3 or 4 weeks. I knew all the children's names, I got involved, you know, I was loving it and everything. But I didn't really know where my behaviour management stood. Now, I'm not a very shouty teacher, I've got to say that. I don't like shouting at the children. I will do if I need to, I will raise my voice, but I don't like doing it. For me, it doesn't help because the children will always go to match the volume level that you've already got to. So it's always been my motto and mantra that I don't want to be a loud teacher, I don't want to shout at them. However, this is the first time that sort of tested that for me, because we're out on the playground playing hockey, tricky anyway, there's no 4 walls on the playground and they're all running around. And I just caught out the corner of one of my eyes, out the corner of my eye, a child with their hockey stick literally about to swing and hit another child's head. Now, this child was very frustrated in the situation, and I could see that they were frustrated in the situation that they were in. But obviously that doesn't give you the excuse to swing and hit somebody around the head. So I shouted at the child, mainly to grab their attention. I shouted their name, didn't tell them off, but shouted their name. And the class teacher who I was working with at the time turned around and really glared at me. And I felt very self-conscious because they also were not a teacher who would shout. And it really gave me an opportunity to reflect and to think about my behaviour management strategies, because in that one, it was instinctive. I shouted to stop the child from swinging and hitting the other child with a hockey stick. And I do believe that was the right thing to do. But it made me think about what it was that I would do in that situation again. And it made me think about how I was going to follow that up, because after shouting the child's name, I called them over and we had a quiet talk away from the class. I didn't want to embarrass them in front of the class, and I wanted them to have an opportunity to discuss that with me, to think about what it was that they needed to do, what was the right course of action, and also to think about the effect their behaviour could have had. So when you're talking about that appropriate authority, don't be worried about being a teacher who doesn't shout, but also think about the right level. And it is about getting that balance. That's not something you will find overnight. It's something you will find with experience and time and a lot of reflection. When it comes to the teaching standard, though, particularly as a trainee teacher at an NQT, it is all about the behaviour educationists, the psychologists and the theorists. And it's all on paper. They are important, and it does give you sort of building blocks. It's clear as you move into teaching, and I love this now, because I remember being at university and thinking, oh gosh, these names that get pulled up every single time, and you think, yeah, okay, I know their study, but have they ever been anywhere near a classroom in the last 50 years? When you move into teachers, you do actually see what they meant, and you can see where the basics and the basis of their research feeds into everyday life. Now, of course, behaviour will be different in every educational setting, in every school, every county, every district, every year group, every class. Okay, every child is different with their behaviour. There is no hard and fast rule whatsoever, and that's why it's good to have a toolbox of behaviour. But the big thing that I benefited from at uni was the discussion around the strategies, and the other big thing was the awareness of low-level behaviour. This was not a term that I'd heard before, but low-level behaviour is the little things in the classroom which, as a newer teacher, slightly drive you up the wall. It's the pen tapping on the table, the turning around. It's not even talking to anybody. They're not distracting anybody else, but they're turning around, talking to the person. They're sort of turning around, looking at the person next to them. They're watching what's going on outside the window. Those sorts of low-level behaviour elements, they are something that I didn't really think about before, but I did learn about that and what was called tactical ignorance, which I'm going to talk about later on. So that's the teaching standard and the theory behind it. And as I say, that is very valuable, particularly for NQTs, because you need to pass the standard at the end of the year. And same with trainee teachers, you need to evidence how you're passing that standard. But it's nothing compared to the front line and the reality of behaviour management. And that's the third part of the webinar this evening. Because actually what we all want to know when we're new to the teaching game is how we're going to deal with it. Now, I don't have answers. I have answers, but you need to sort of pick your way through them and to consider them yourselves. Unfortunately, there is no educationalist, there is no theorist, there is no author who has a hard and fast rule of how to deal with behaviour of every single child you will meet. It's just impossible, okay? It's not going to happen. But there are lots of things that you can do to help develop that strategy and to think about it. Now, one of the big things, and this is what's important to me, one of the big things that's happened this year and what's helped me with this webinar this evening is that we at our school have really thought about our behaviour policy, and we are changing the landscape of behaviour in our school. It's something that we've identified from previous Ofsteds and from previous peer reviews that we've done with other schools, that behaviour is an area that is good in our school, but it's something that we could push to outstanding. And so I've been a member of the team that's worked, the working party that's worked on behaviour, and ahead of September and a brand new academic year, we are hoping to launch some new ideas that might work in this. But it's been really good for me to reflect on what I've done for the last 6 years, because actually in schools you can get stuck in ways, and you may not always think about the effectiveness of them until you get a new opportunity to shake things up. So we're going to talk about how to tackle behaviour in your school. This is based on my experience. It's not the only perspective out there, and there are many other people there who can give you advice. So what I would say is that after the webinar today, if you're inspired by this and you really want to think about behaviour, go and check out some of those Twitter feeds and books that I've mentioned earlier on by those authors. So the starting point for dealing with behaviour on the front line is to check your school behaviour policy. Now, if you haven't started your new school yet, this is the prime time to do that, because we haven't got time to think about behaviour management. It's a policy that most schools have, and I think most schools should have actually a behaviour policy. I think it's an Ofsted required one. A school behaviour policy which outlines many different elements. It outlines the different levels of behaviour management. Okay, so for example, if you're in a secondary school, it might be that it outlines the detention system that you have, or the sanction system there. If you are in EYFS or Key Stage 1, it might outline the rewards that children will get and how often positive praise will be used and for what sort of examples. In Key Stage 2, it really combines both actually, because there will be a lot of sanctions, but more praise, more positives, because in Key Stage 2 and in primary schools, obviously, we're dealing with a lot more positive and constructive, whereas for senior schools and secondary schools, the shift changes ever so slightly. But your school behaviour policy is the place to go. All right. Now, I know that our school behaviour policy for the last 6 years, and say it's in a sort of process of review at the moment, thinks about and talks about and outlines the different levels of reward that we can give. If it's everything from a nice positive comment in a book or a sticker, if it's a house point or a raffle ticket, depending on the year group, if it is a values band. So we used to have once a half-term values bands, little wristbands given out to children who had demonstrated values, and every member of staff in our school put them in a book. It could be, as we have now in our school, a good news book. So if a child's done a particularly good piece of work, they're sent to the head teacher or the deputy head. They get a shiny sticker, which, to be fair, at the age of 28, I would still appreciate. A smiley sticker, a shiny sticker, even better. And they're written in the good news book. 3 times in the good news book and a letter goes home. So there's usually lots of these systems in place. And it's really good for you as a newer teacher to check that out. That will help with confidence in the 3 C's and consistency, because if you know that that is the system there, then it's going to help you to feel happy and proactive in delivering those systems. But also it helps you because the children will know those systems already. And if you are a newer teacher who doesn't understand the system, they may begin to take advantage. And again, I've seen that happen in the past. It will also usually outline rules. So in our school, we've got school rules. We've got 5 of them, nice and simple. We don't have the golden rule officially on paper, but that is sort of brought in within PSHE and is just part of our values. And we do have our 6 school values. Now, again, a behaviour policy might work on values instead of rules. And we're seeing more of a shift in that. Sometimes that's good because actually sometimes the values are more open-ended and it gives the children more of an opportunity to think about how they're going to demonstrate them and how their behaviour is influenced by them. But obviously, as you have younger settings or sometimes children who struggle with that because it's quite abstract, they all need those hard and fast rules, those I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. So you usually have a combination of both, but your school behaviour policy should outline those. And then of course you might have class rules as well. I always write class rules with my class at the beginning of every year. We sign them all together and it gives them that ownership, it gives them that buy-in. It gives them an identity as well as part of a class. And I always pose it in the fact of what would you like to have in your classroom? Because if you're sat in my classroom for 5-6 hours a day, I want to know what is going to help you to learn, what's going to help you to enjoy your time, to be happy, to be the best learners that you can be. How do you want the behaviour to be around you? That also makes it easier to pick children up on bad behaviour or negative behaviour or not making the right decision. If they have come up with that together, okay? You do need to be in line with school on that one, and that is important because if you are in line with the rest of the school with your behaviour management policy, then you will be backed up, okay? And I have heard stories of NQTs from other schools and trainee teachers who have tried their own systems, which have been very, very far away from what the school had done. And when a parent has then come in to complain, they've not been able to be backed up as much as they would like to be because they haven't followed the school policy. So even if you are a trainee teacher, that is so important and it's really, really key to do that one. The next thing is to work out what is important to you. And again, this links to last week's webinar. What behaviour would you like to have in your classroom? You can steer the children when you're doing the class rules. Okay, you can do that one. In my classroom, particularly as it was brought in about 2 or 3 years ago, I'm a big believer of the growth mindset. And I do believe that comes into behaviour because actually very closed behaviour and negative behaviour can come from when a child isn't able to do something. If they're bored or they can't complete the task and they zone out and they phase out, then that is a big factor in behaviour. So think about what you want behaviours to look like in your classroom. If you've got a growth mindset element there and a child's not done, not managed a task or they're struggling with it, make sure that you promote the right process. And remember that behaviour is always about the child's decision. And when you do talk to a child and you address that, and again, this is a big golden rule of behaviour nowadays, if you are addressing a child's behaviour, then really do think about the fact that you are talking to the child about their decision, their behaviour, and not the child. Okay, the child isn't bad. It's just that the decision they made may not have been the right one. It may not have been the one in accordance with the school rules. All right. Don't ever put that negativity onto the child directly because that can be quite damaging for them. And again, I've heard a lot of particularly more experienced teachers and older teachers who have been in the system for a long time say, well, that's rubbish. But it's really true. And actually, I've seen that myself when I was a child. Not that I was misbehaving or naughty, obviously, but when I was a child, a lot of my peers and as I've gone up and seen my little brother and other younger people where my family go through schools, that is a really good point, and actually you will have children who are very defeatist and who, fall off the cliff when it comes to behaviour, when they feel that they're hated and they're not appreciated because people blame them and are saying they don't like them. And it's semantics, but it's very important. It's very, very key. Think about which values as well you want to promote and encourage. And again, if you've got school values, encourage those. But there's nothing to, say you can't change them, not change them, add to them, I suppose, and promote other ones. So resilience isn't one of our school values, but it's one that I talk a lot about with my class because I think it's really important. And again, that's part of my identity as a teacher, that I want to have resilient learners who are ready for a career that probably doesn't exist right now. And I want them to get ready for the future. So for me, values are just as important as behaviour, and I reward the good values, but also I give the opportunity to show them. And if they're not showing them, we discuss why that might not have been the right decision. Next, you need to think about how you're going to reward and sanction behaviour. Now, again, behaviour policies might be a way to go here. And if your school is a stickler for consistency, which I am, then you are going to want to stick with that, okay? But there is nothing to say that you can't go a little bit off grid sometimes. Always follow the rule of thumb. If it's above and beyond to an utter degree, you're probably not doing the right thing, and you need to think about reining that in a little bit. It's that fair and appropriateness that the teaching standards talk about. But it doesn't always have to be a sticker, but it's important that children don't just behave because they get something, okay? You need to think about the rewards and sanctions. It doesn't need to be material things all the time. It could just be positive praise, all right? When it comes to rewards, think about the school systems that you've got. Think about what you might want to include in your classroom. Say in my classroom, we have raffle tickets because that's our year group thing. But in other year groups, in the past, we've had different systems for each year group. So I've seen marble jars, I've seen house points, which 20 of which will get you a little reward. There are loads of different things that you can do. In terms of sanctions, it's the same, okay? And it's good to have a consistent system. So in our school, we use the traffic light system. All the children start on green every morning. If a child misbehaves once, they get a warning. A second time, they go up to amber. A third time, they go up to red. Amber, I will usually have a chat with the child, and I will discuss the behaviour with them if I haven't done so already, and I'll talk about that in a second. If they go up to red, then a thinking sheet is done and a letter goes home to their parents, or the thinking sheet goes home to the parents. That makes sure that we communicate with the parents and they know what's going on with behaviour, which is a really key element of this, to clue the parents in, because nothing worse than this happening for 3 months and then the parents finding out and you sort of dropping it on them and going, well, why didn't you tell us? Yeah, it's a really good system to give that clear indication. And again, it's clarity for the children. It really helps. So think about the sanctions that you have in school. But yeah, rewards and sanctions, go with the school policy. But as I said, you might want to go off grid. Sometimes I will admit this, once a month or so, I might say to the children, do you know what? You've been absolutely fantastic this week. So Friday afternoon, we'll pack our bags up at 3:05 instead of 3:10, and I'll read you 5 minutes of a story. Now, that's not a massive reward, particularly with my reading aloud to my class, but they love it. It's something that they can work towards. Children like a goal or an aim. As I've said there, though, I do think, personally for me, it's really important behaviour isn't just rewarded with material possessions, because it shouldn't really be that children do things just because they get something. It needs to be, if it's effective behaviour management and it is really values-based, it needs to be motivated by within. And I think that's something that a lot of values-based schools are realising 3 or 4 or 5 years as we are now into that system. So, reward it with a positive comment. Do it one-to-one. Have a one-to-one chat with a child at the end of the day. Keep somebody back. They always think they get in trouble to begin with, but they realise. And say to them one-to-one, so I've been really impressed today about the fact that you didn't give up when you did that. That will mean the world to them. But they haven't got anything to take away material from, with them. They're just doing it because they know they've done the right thing. And that is a good reason to behave. Okay? They don't get something material, but they know inside they've done the right thing. And that's why values-based education is really key with behaviour, and how you as a teacher can scaffold that. So really think about those elements, because actually those are your tools to make sure that the behaviour works. Although you can recite the rules and have them up on the walls, it's about how you reward them and sanction them that are really, really key. The other thing to say with a one-to-one chat, it's really key that you can have a one-to-one chat with the child at break time or lunchtime. I was quite nervous about this when I first started, sitting down with the child opposite me and going, right, I need to be the adult here and tell you off, basically. You can tell children off. I think what's really, really key, in my honest opinion, And I found more and more over the years, and I didn't realize at the beginning, and probably is one of my biggest reflections in behavior, is that most of the time when children continue a behavior, which is a negative decision or the wrong decision, they're doing it because they don't understand what they're doing wrong. And this is usually more common, I've got to admit, with SEND children or children who have communication needs or processing needs, because it takes them a little bit of time to process what they've done. Bless them, literally they do something and within a second a teacher is on them and we've moved on and they don't know. So have that time to have a one-to-one chat. Don't make it a telling off, particularly if it's the first time. And again, I mean, it's difficult to role play it or to show it. I would sit them down opposite me or next to me. Don't be intimidating with it. And a bit like an observation, we all hate that first question, don't we? How do you think it went? But as a child, you can say, why do you think I've called you back? What behaviour decision did I not like to see? What decision might not have been the right one? And again, remember that you talk about the behaviour or the decision. You don't talk about the child and them as a negative. You talk about the decisions that they made and work it through together. Because again, I've seen sometimes that when a child, particularly at the beginning of a school year, does have a little bit of an issue with behaviour, then I can put them onto an amber or they can be close to a red. And it's not until the end of the day when I sit them down, or even break time sometimes, I think I'm not even going to let it wait that long. I sit down with them and talk it through, and all of a sudden they go, oh, okay, right, yeah, I sort of knew that was the wrong thing to do, but either I didn't realise I was doing it, which actually is an acceptable excuse sometimes. I know we hate it, but it's true. But also they just didn't quite, they were doing it, but they didn't really know what to do instead. So this is a good bit of pastoral care. Remember, behaviour is not always something that we just need to squash out of them. It's something that we need to discuss as well. And we really need to think about what we can do to help that child. So have that one-to-one chat, because actually it could be that after a one-to-one chat and 10 minutes of break time running around, they come back in a completely different child. And that's really lovely. Finally, think about what behaviour or how behaviour, is appropriate for the situation. Not all situations need the same behaviour. Now, this again is another one that it took me a little bit of time to work out. And all of the student teachers, trainee teachers I've worked with and NQTs that I've worked alongside over the years, I've always passed this on to them. Because as a new teacher and as a trainee teacher, I always wanted my lessons to be silent. Now, it's not because I'm a control freak, and let me tell you, and sometimes I am, but it was because I thought that was the right thing. I remember being at school and working in silence. I remember seeing the experienced teachers when I was a trainee teacher and I was observing other classes. I remember them being silent. But silence is not always good for a lesson. And for the trainee teachers that I've worked with this year, both of the SCIT students and for ones that I've had in previous years as well, I've always tried to emphasise that fact. Because actually, I remember having observations where children are talking and it just freaks me out completely. And it just goes to pot because I'm too worried about the behaviour management. I'm not focusing on my teaching. Now, luckily, that was 6 or 7 years ago again now. But, you need to think about the right level of behaviour. So with behaviour for learning, so in a lesson, think about the noise level. Is it a silent task? Can you have a lesson with a bit of buzz, which I love as a teacher now when you have those sparky lessons where the kids are up and about and chatting with each other, focused on the learning. And again, that's where your expectations come in, your clarity and your consistency. But yeah, is your behaviour for learning requiring silence? If it's not, don't expect it. Don't break yourself over trying to get silence when it's not necessary and it's not the best type for your lesson. Think about attention, think about focus, and think about determination. Determination is part of behaviour, but we forget that a lot. With the values-based education, it's coming through. But yeah, think about the fact, are the children in your class showing the determination? Are they giving up too early? And again, pick them up on it. Say to them, you know what, you've done some brilliant work on question 1, 2, and 3. You got stuck on 4, and I can tell you've given up. Now, that's not the right decision, and you know that because you can do question 4, and I can see looking ahead that you can do 5, 6, and 7, but you've stopped at this barrier here. So let's think about it together. What should have been your decision when you didn't know? Yeah, you should have put your hand up. We could have worked on it together. You could have worked on it with a partner. You could have grabbed a resource or used the working wall, and you could have moved on. So it's all to do with behaviour and thought processes. Be positive, be constructive. As I've said all the way through these webinars, negative is not a word we want to use in schools. Be positive, be constructive. There's different behaviour on the playground. Obviously, noise level, very different. This is more where values can come into play. When they're outside, are they showing cooperation? Are they showing respect of other people? Are they going and nicking somebody else's football? Are they playing a big game and they're taking up half of the playground and getting annoyed at other people who are getting in their way? Are they showing self-control? That's a very, very big and difficult one outside when they haven't got the one-to-one support and they haven't got the adults watching down on them like hawks. That's behavior on the playground. And again, it's a different situation, so it requires different traits, different elements. There are different things we can praise and different things that we can work on and be constructive with together. And also behavior towards others, which sort of bridges over the two. You work obviously with others in the classroom, or work with others in the playground. Thinking then about kindness and cooperation, two of the school values that I work with, and I think they're universal ones, they're pretty key. But also behavior towards others, listening. Listening is a behavior, and it's one of the things that I will pick up on with children. And again, if I can see that a child is not listening to something that is going on, if it's me teaching or if it's a TA working with them or an LSA working with them or their peers, I will pick them up on it. I won't tell them off, but again, I will get them to think about the decision they made. Can you tell me what your partner just said? Okay. Do you think it would have been helpful if you'd listened in that situation? Because now you might not know what to do. Can you answer the question that your partner just said? Why not? Why might it have been better to be listening when we're doing an activity where you're working with a partner or doing questions and answers? All those little things are quite useful. And of course, they are key skills that you are going to need as an adult. It's also about negotiation and compromise as well. And that sort of links with the self-control. You will have children who just cannot share. And again, that goes from EYFS all the way up to Key Stage 5. And university, personally. You will have the children who can't share, they can't negotiate, they can't compromise and make those deals with other children. They can't find a middle ground. And again, that does come down to behavior sometimes. It does come down to their values and their inner attitudes and beliefs and morals, but it comes down to behavior. And again, with all these things, if you see behavior as a series of decisions and choices that a child has made, you can really, really play on that to get them to work on that. So we compromise, right, okay, it's a 5-minute task, you guys haven't done any work. Why haven't you done any work? Okay, you weren't compromising with each other. What was difficult about that? Was there one person who wasn't listening to the other person? Okay, if we hadn't listened to each other, what could we have achieved in this time? Right, and then you sit with a child and you say, okay, let's work together on this one. I'll be that mediator, that middle ground. Look at what I'm doing. I'm helping you to listen. I'm helping you to interact. Now we'll go on, take that ownership of your behavior and work with it. So behavior is a much bigger umbrella and a much bigger bracket than just telling a child off. Okay, it really is thinking about the decisions they've made, the attitudes that they've got towards things, and what they can achieve out of it. Start with your behavior policy. Think about your rewards and sanctions. Think about what it is that you expect. Think about your expectations and your drivers, I suppose, for behavior. Think about what you want to see in your classroom in terms of behavior, in terms of the rules, in terms of the behavior for learning and the attitudes that they're showing one another. Role model them and be an advocate for making the right decisions. And then that is sort of the core that then spreads out and permeates with the rest of your behavior. So in terms of on the front line, I would say those would be my big bits of advice and structure to working through how you will develop your behavior management strategies as you go through. Now, I'm going to talk about a few strategies and other considerations. And before I do that, because of course we're coming towards the end of the webinar this evening, if you do want to tweet in or send a question in, or a scenario that you want me to talk through or you want us to discuss, then please do so now. Okay, so at Life of an NQT on Twitter with the hashtag Wednesday Night Webinar or the live chat here on YouTube. Is there something you're not 100% sure about? Have you got a great idea that you want to share with us and tell us? That'd be great. Anything that can be useful, this is the opportunity to get it in. It's your sort of 5-minute warning before we get to that part. So let's go for it. Okay. In terms of strategies then, and this is probably what most people came for, which is why I put it near the end. In terms of strategies, my advice to you would be to have a clear number of them. Don't overload with strategies. I've seen that before. Be consistent with them. Don't chop and change every month or so. Have some really good ones. Discuss them with your children if you'd like to at the beginning of the year, although obviously that can be tricky because you don't want them to abuse that opportunity to have an involvement in there. Push for the ownership of their behavior, but give them the structure and the direction to help. Good strategies, I think, for positive praise. The proactive positive praise is good. Don't just say to a child that they are they're doing well, they're doing good, well done. Tell them why. And again, that's something I've heard in a couple of training courses over the years, but it's so true. You signpost the good behaviour. It helps them to understand it a bit more. So well done for doing that bit of work. You've worked really, really hard on that. You've got more done than I would have expected of you. You've exceeded my expectations. Well done for picking up that piece of litter over on there on the floor. Because you didn't need to do that. It wasn't your bit of litter, but I know that you've showed your values of respect for the environment and your friends by picking it up and doing the right thing, okay? Really signpost behaviour, make it clear to the children what they've done well. A well done is not useful for them in some ways. In terms of strategies of rewards, again, I love to have stickers. My NQT year, because I was an NQT, and I say that like it's a bad thing. The NQT year is the best time of your teaching career, in my opinion, because you're all eager and ready to go. I went and got myself some personalised stickers, Mr. Pierce stickers, penguin in the middle. Used to give them out to children, stick them on their books, stick them on them. It's great. Do something that gives you the opportunity to feel proud of your behaviour management and for you to take ownership of it as well. You want to feel comfortable, you want to feel confident. It's one of the C's. So get yourself some sort of rewards. Stick with your behaviour policies from school. But if you want to do something extra like a marble jar, check with your mentor, check with your head teacher. They might like the fact you're being proactive with that and that you're thinking of new ideas. So, discuss with them if there is something that you can do as a class. We had golden time when I first started my teaching career, which is half an hour on Friday. If children did things wrong, we could take certain amounts of minutes of golden time off of them. That was good to a point, but it didn't quite work in our school situation, and we reflected on that 18 months on. But think about those little things that you could do golden time, 5 minutes at the end of the week, bit of class reading, something that's going to motivate your pupils. Other strategies for sanctions. Again, any sanction strategy needs to focus on the decision of the child, the choice of the child, the behaviour of the child, not the child themselves. That's really clear. And it can be difficult. I've got to add to that. It can be very difficult. And I would tell any teacher who says that they've never stumbled on that one that they are absolutely lying, because I have done. If a child does something which really, really gets to you in your core, it's very anti what you believe and what you want in your classroom, you can take that personally. And there are times where I've just sat there and I've gone, you were really silly then. You were really silly. I was really disappointed in you. And all of a sudden, it hits you as the lump in your throat. Not because you're going to get in trouble, but because you think, actually, that wasn't right. That's not going to help that child. That's going to get them to spiral. Okay? You need to think about really articulating that it is their decision that you're not happy with, but they have a choice to rectify it. They have that opportunity. You've not written them off completely. Children hate that. If they feel that they've been written off and they can't resolve it, they don't like it at all. That is when you get that spiral. So really, really make sure you put that language into those constructive conversations about behaviour. Get other people involved, send them to a head of year, send them to a deputy head, send them to a head. Don't escalate it too quickly though, because of course they are powerful tools in your behaviour toolbox. You don't want to use them too soon. I remember the first time that we had our traffic light system, I put a child on the red. It took me 8 months of our school year. So we're talking April, May. All of a sudden, as soon as I did that, the child was devastated. They came in the next morning. I had nowhere else to go. They'd been to the head teacher. They had had a letter home. That was it. That was the top of my A game. I didn't have anything worse to give. And I thought about that all the way through the year. And it was just one of those days where it just got to me too much. And I just went, right, that's it. You're going on red. Having followed the steps. But don't escalate it too quickly would be a big bit of advice. Be considerate of pupils and their needs. Because it may be, like that child that I just spoke about a minute ago, that actually they had a real problem with behaviour. They really struggled with it. It was to do with their, situation and environment outside of school. And I've been aware of that all year. And all of a sudden, one day, it just went. It went. And, I had been very considerate all the way up through the year, but I just really struggled on that day. But think about it, because you don't want to lose that battle with them. And actually, if you've got a child who might need more steps on a behaviour system or with warnings, there is a time where maybe that consistency can swing slightly, but make it consistent for that child and say to them, look, you are part of our class, you're on the same system. I'm going to give you an extra warning, because I know that you find it really difficult to make that decisions, but I don't want you to ever use that extra warning. Challenge them, give them the opportunity and that ownership back. Try not to over-reward children, however, who do have behavioural needs. And again, that's very tricky. My own brother, bless him, my little brother, he's 24 now. When he was younger, I remember clear as day him asking my mum, and I've said this every behaviour management training I've ever been to, asking my mum if it was okay to be naughty at school because the naughty kids got rewards. They got more treats. They had sticker charts. That goes back to what I said about not giving children too many material possessions linked to behaviour. Okay, we don't want to do that. We don't want to make it cool and positive to make the wrong decisions. So really think about that balance in your head. It can be easy to do sticker charts, reward charts, this, that, and the other, but think about doing it in the right way. Do it for the positive, and then adapt it to the needs of pupils, but don't make it out and out very obvious that the naughty children, can sit on their chair for 5 minutes and get a sticker, whereas everybody else doesn't. You've got to make it fair. Think about how you can involve the adults around them. So think about, the teaching assistants, the LSA, support staff within the school, the office staff, everybody's involved with behaviour, but also their parents as well. Get them involved in this. Don't be scared of the parents, be proactive, get there ahead of the game with the parents. Very, very useful piece of advice. Think about all of those around a child, not just the adults, but also their peers. Can you get the peers to model the good behaviour? Can you sit them next to people who will show them that and model those things? So those are the last considerations. It's been a whistle-stop tour of behaviour, and I have actually gone for 50 minutes, despite the fact it was going to be a shorter one tonight. So that is all in terms of behaviour from this week's Wednesday night webinar. Next week, I will be back with the final YouTube episode, particularly because the internet's been rubbish. We'll be looking at report writing. Now, that does come with a caveat, with the fact that we do not know about reports for the end of this year yet. We're waiting for government guidance because of the COVID-19 outbreak. So that may change. I'm likely to do it anyway, because obviously report tips you're going to need every year, and this is going to be on YouTube forever. So more than likely we'll do a report writing tips and tricks and expectations next Wednesday. Remember though, in 2 weeks' time, so on the 27th of May, I'm still planning on doing a Zoom webinar, which means I can be a little bit more interactive with those that have been watching. And as always, a big thanks for those of you who are. So if you are interested in a 6th episode, a Zoom episode where you can talk to me live and we can interact and do something a little bit more useful and personalized for you, then please get in contact with me through the ways that I will tell you in just a second. For now, for those of you who need to run off and watch Great British Menu, which I'll be watching in a few minutes, thank you very much for getting involved. Thanks for your company as always and for your support on Twitter. Please share this as always. We need to build up the Wednesday night webinar series so that when we come to June and July, when I plan to do the next one, then we can get some more people involved. In the meantime, you can find me in the normal place, of course, Twitter @lifeofanNQT, on the email, and I have a lovely email this week, so thank you very much for those of you that are emailing. lifeofanNQT@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram @lifeofanQT, and on the blog where the replay for this will be, and information about next week's webinar, plus some blog posts if I get a spare minute in my day, which at the moment I'm not. I'm here for you guys, so I'm trying my best. You can also see the replay, of course, the YouTube video right here on the YouTube channel from this and the previous 3 webinars. But for now, thank you very much for your company. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe, stay sane in a time which is very difficult in education, but we are getting through together. And as always, if you've got questions or concerns or scenarios, or you want some advice, then get in contact with me. That is exactly why I am here. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye.